Dear
Hocam.
participants, hi. This is Professor Dr. Tuğba Karabulut, and today I'm very happy that I would like to introduce Professor Dr. Simon Collinson to you. He's from University of Birmingham, and today he's going to make us a very nice presentation, and he will talk about how stronger partnerships between universities and firms can support more competitive and inclusive regional systems of innovation. He's a well-known professor in this field, and also he's the author of international business textbook from Pearson. So we're very happy to host you today, dear Professor Collinson. Welcome to our university.
Well, thank you very much. No, I really appreciate the invitation, and it's a real pleasure to be hosted by the Istanbul Commerce University, which I'd not heard of before, but I have got to know now in my preparation. So thank you to Tuğba and Merv.
Our Vice Rector will also make the opening speech.
Excellent.
So we are very happy about it, and we would like to thank to our Rector, Vice Rector, Dean to give us this chance to make this webinar. Dear Elçin Hocam, please start. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Karabulut. Welcome to the 32nd Science and Society meeting series organized by Istanbul Commerce University. As Professor Karabulut also mentioned, we have a very important guest today. Professor Simon Collinson is our guest, and he's from Birmingham, University of Birmingham. As it is written here in his slides, he is Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor, Regional Engagement, and Director, City Region Economic Development Institute. We know him, our students also know him. As an economist, I'm also so excited being with him in this webinar. He's also, as she told, he's also co-writer of an important book, international business book from Pearson. His research focuses on multinational firms, productivity, innovation, competitiveness, and also regional economic growth. We are very happy being with him today. His research are published so many important journal articles. I don't want to take much time, but he has so many grants, awards, project awards. And also I want to mention that since our university actually funded by Istanbul Chamber of Commerce, Education and Social Services Foundation, as you know, we have so close relations with business world, actually. So this webinar will be one of the most important webinar in our university. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much also accepting being with us. And just, I want to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank
you very much.
Yeah, dear Professor, welcome to again 32nd Science and Society meeting. Please start.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. That's very kind of you in terms of an introduction. Most of my career, I've been very close to research on business and with business. So prior to my current role, I was Dean of the Birmingham Business School. Prior to that, I was Deputy Dean at Warwick Business School. So in writing my textbook and in teaching students, my focal point has always been international business and innovation, firm level innovation. Those are my special areas. But I now have evolved to have two roles, and I will talk about both of them because they do have an effect on the research I'm doing, but also the interaction I have with businesses. My first role is I'm Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor leading on regional engagement. So I work across the whole university with the Vice Chancellor and the leadership team, connecting different activities of the university with regional stakeholders. This includes the Chamber of Commerce. In fact, yesterday I chaired a panel sitting next to the Chief Executive of our Chamber of Commerce, and we do a lot of work with the Chamber. But I also link up with the Mayor of the City of Birmingham, which is the second largest city in the UK, Andy Street, and we work with the City Council. So we have public and private stakeholders. And that's the first job. And my second job, I established a large research institute, and I'll talk about that in a second. But my research institute analyzes civic engagement from universities, and also analyzes and tries to understand how partnerships between universities and regions and universities and firms can enhance particularly inclusive growth. This might be a term that's new to you. We have had in the UK a process of trying to level up or leveling up. It's trying to grow faster as a country economically, but also make sure that that growth enables us to become more equal as a society. So it's about reducing inequality, and inclusive growth is quite difficult to do while you improve competitiveness and productivity. So my institute researches this, and our university has this as a top priority. It's one of the oldest civic universities in the UK. It was established in 1900 by the mayor of the city, Joseph Chamberlain, who was also a member of parliament, and focused on enabling growth in the city region. So we, as a university, we have about 10 Nobel laureates. We're about 90th in the QS World University Rankings, so we're top 100, and we're about 14th in the UK in terms of our research and the quality of our student programs. So I'm proud to be part of the university, and also proud to to have this role in terms of the university. But also we sit in a context where the national agenda is around economic growth and support for growth and inclusive growth from universities. So these are the things I'm involved in at the moment. So City Ready, hopefully I have just changed my screen to a new screen, and you can see now just an overview of City Ready. Our remit, I have 25 full-time academics and data analysts in my research institute. Our remit is to help city regions grow better, and this is about balancing across the UK, where London is the dominant economy, helping other regional cities like Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester to grow a bit faster. But not only do we look at productivity and economic growth, we're always interested in inclusivity. And increasingly, the government and globally, we're interested in sustainable growth. So how do investments, or how do policy interventions enable growth that is sustainable, making progress towards net zero or lower carbon emissions? How does it improve productivity and inclusivity? And by understanding city regions as quite complex systems where infrastructure, skills, universities, firms, businesses, policies, all these things interact to trigger different kinds of growth, or in fact trigger decline and lack of growth. That's what we're established to do. So the City Region Economic Development Institute was established in 2015. I was still Dean of the Business School, but I won £4.5 million to establish it. And then I stepped down as Dean in 2016 and became the founding director alongside my DPVC role. We're explicitly interdisciplinary. We have a hybrid structure. Half of us are academics looking at long-term peer-reviewed journal articles, but half of the team are data and policy analysts working on contracts and commission funding. So it's a hybrid structure that enables us to be very problem-oriented. I'm sure, like your university, either following what business is looking for from research, or we follow for policymakers and what they need from research. We then got a large fund from the government in 2019. The core funding was 5 million, but we managed to push that up to 11 million with match funding from a whole range of partners, enabling us to grow at this level. So we have partnerships in the US and in parts of the EU, particularly with the European Commission and the OECD. We also have a campus in Dubai, and we're also looking at setting up an institute in Shenzhen in China. So part of what fuels our research is comparative analysis of how different city regions across the world actually manage their growth and how they grow differently in different places. So that's what City Ready does. And what I want to do is talk a bit about that work, but then I will bring it round to come back to the university a bit and use some examples from the university to understand much more specifically about how universities can work with firms in partnership. And I'll give you some very clear case studies of where this has worked, but also some lessons of how we, it's a challenging balancing act. So how we work to make sure that firms and universities work better. But the first framework is a little more complicated, but this is born out of the City Ready work. And I hope that's not too complex or complicated for you. But in a sense, our framing here is around the region and economic regions. And regions are, as I assume the Istanbul city region is, very much a product of its past. History is tremendously important. History leads us to have a set of endowments, a set of factors, whether it's your geographic location on a river, at the nexus of cultures, at the nexus of trading regions like Istanbul, which is famous for that history. But it also gives you a legacy of transport infrastructure, a culture, a set of religions, and institutions, governance institutions that oversee how that city region will grow. So you're partly locked into the past matters, but place also matters in terms of the combination of these things that are listed in the center of this diagram. Infrastructure, your housing, your utilities, your labor markets, your industry structures, what firms are located there. They work in combination. One of the difficulties of academia is that we tend to focus on specific disciplines. So we study skills and labor markets separately from transport infrastructure, or economics of growth separately from the cultures and the sociology underpinning business behavior. So one of the aims of City Ready is to connect different disciplinary approaches to understand city regions as systems. So in the center of your region, you have those combinations of these different factors. These, to a certain extent, affect your attractiveness. Your attractiveness to several things. Are you attractive to firms to invest in the region and locate there? Are you attractive to universities and higher education establishments to grow and get bigger and better? Are you attractive to skilled people? Because globally there is a talent shortage and there is a talent war amongst firms and universities. Everybody wants high-skilled, high-value individuals. So is your city region attractive? Does it attract skills, or do you actually find skills leaving to go to other places? So attractiveness is important. And secondly, what we call absorptive capacity is important. The degree to which your region, and particularly the firms in your region, have the capacity to absorb new types of innovation capabilities. So their propensity to be able to take on new skills, to take on technology, to take on new processes, and develop their innovation capability. Absorptive capacity is quite dependent on this regional system. Your proximity to universities and R&D, but also your proximity to skills and transport infrastructure and so on and so forth. So at the center of our framing, we have the city region and place matters. But on this axis, we can focus on different dimensions, but I'm looking at firms and universities. Firms are critical. Do you have a critical mass of particular kinds of firms, which is called smart specialization? We have a very strong sector focus on advanced manufacturing and the automotive industry in Birmingham. But we also, a third of the economy is business and financial professional services. So we have banks, insurance firms, and professional services, which the UK is very strong in, but Birmingham is very strong as well, about a third of our economy. So firms and your sector specialization is important as a city region. And then secondly, on the other side, we've got universities. Universities alongside other R&D intensive firms or public sector institutes for innovation. Do you have a critical mass? Is there a cluster of universities that focus in particular areas and give you a competitive advantage in R&D terms? And then the last piece of the framing is around the interaction between universities and firms. And one pattern we find globally, which is really interesting, is that there is a tendency for the top class universities, the most research intensive universities, to actually focus on international knowledge users rather than local knowledge users. And that's an interesting facet. In fact, more what we call applied universities, local universities, sometimes smaller, but often very student intensive, but universities that support small firms in the region are much more intensively focused on knowledge exchange and the transfer of technology to local firms. And they actually are, in a lot of cases, more valuable for developing local economies. The best, of course, is a portfolio of high intensity research focused universities, what we call Russell Group universities, and other colleges, skills, HE centers and R&D that focuses on local small firms. So, but again, what you inherit and what you have as a region affects your ability to grow. And it's this interaction between universities and firms that I want to move on to talk about. But I hope you understand that framing. We can come back to it in the Q&A, because we take this as a sort of starting point for the analysis in City Ready. So moving on to the university and the firm connection much more explicitly, I think what's interesting here is that we take sort of four specific areas that we tend to focus on. One is the direct economic impact, and I'll give you a couple of slides showing this. Universities, just by being in a place, have a direct and an indirect employment, procurement, and economic impact, and we can measure that. And it's an interesting thing to know. It actually enables you to do things with government because they recognize your economic contribution. Secondly, universities are a source of supply of skills. University of Birmingham recruits about 26 or 27% of its students, its undergraduate students, from the local region. We have 37,000 students. But on the undergraduate side, about 27% come from the local city region. 13 years ago, about 36% of those students stayed to work in the region. That has now grown to 50%. So 50% of our students stay to work in the region. That is a sign that the region is growing in terms of opportunities for high-skilled graduates from a top-class university. And the growth in retention and skills retention in the region is critical to the economic growth prospects for the region. So in that one sense, the university is adding value, not just by being here, but by its students retaining in the region and staying to work here. And I'll come on to talk about a specific example of that. Thirdly, which I'll focus on much more towards the end of my talk, is about R&D, commercialization and innovation with firms. So we'll get on to that. And then finally, something I won't talk about, but something we do quite a lot at in terms of trying to measure, is much more difficult, is the civic or the community or the charity work of students and faculty and even research programs that assist low-income groups in the city. University of Birmingham does a lot of that. It's a growing area in the UK for universities to get involved in third sector activities. And we do study that, but I won't talk about it today. So those are the sort of four areas we tend to parcel out the economic contribution. If we jump to this slide, quite a long time ago, the University of Birmingham commissioned London Economics to do an analysis of our economic contribution. In fact, they expanded this to try and look at non-economic contribution in terms of R&D and cultural and civic work. But in a sense, the sort of punchline there is it's around 3.4 billion. 3,481 million direct and indirect contribution to not, this is not just the region, but this is total economic impact. Now, what they didn't try and do back then, and I've got a second slide showing this, they didn't try and understand the regional contribution. They simply talked about the total aggregate economic impact, because this was done back in 2016-17, so it's quite a while ago, and we are just commissioning our next impact study of the university. But it is interesting to parcel down into the students, the research, the what we call exports, but effectively that's tuition fee income from international students. And then what we call the multiplier effects. Multiplier effects are indirect effects. If you employ someone in a region and they spend their money in a region, they consume goods and products, and that's a multiplier. If your procurement buys things from local firms, you are creating a multiplier through a supply chain effect. And we can measure this. The university is a big anchor institution and has a really sizable effect on the region and on the national economy. More recently, the University of Oxford had an analysis also by London Economics, and you can Google them. They're a good consulting firm. There's several of these that do this and specialize. And this is Oxford Economics activities, and you can see the scale. I mean, University of Birmingham is in the top 6 or 7 largest universities in the country. We were some time ago 3.4 billion. Economic impact of Oxford is 15.7 billion. Oxford and Cambridge are even more than the Harvard and the Stanford in the US. They are really a different category of university in the UK context. They're like London, different planet. So 15.7 billion, it's absolutely enormous. Probably a smaller amount in proportional terms is regional, because Oxford is such a smaller city than Birmingham. The bigger the city and the more embedded the university in the city, the more the local impact. So what was interesting about this, and I won't get into too much detail, but if you're interested in this, this has been an evolving methodology that these consulting firms are using, and City Ready, my institute, is helping with this. They're getting much more sophisticated at understanding the impact of research and knowledge exchange, which are research projects often jointly with firms that have a long-term impact through the improvement in innovation capability in a region. It's very difficult to measure, but the estimate from Oxford is that, in fact, the impact of the research and knowledge exchange is 7.9 billion. That means almost half, in fact, half of the total impact, the aggregate impact, including students' expenditure, including fees of students, including multiplier effects, half, 50% of the economic impact of that university is in its research and its knowledge exchange activities. And that's huge. That's really an unusual figure. It's a very research intensive university. But the methodology used here shows that universities are probably underestimating their importance as drivers of innovation, usually with firms or through firms in not just regions, but nationally. And in the UK, in the context of growth, this is quite an important methodology because it allows us to evidence the pathways through which we can help the economy grow and we can directly support innovation. So that was important for us. I'm going to come back to innovation and R&D quite soon. I just want to touch back on skills as the second category of impact that I talked about. And then we're going to move on to understand the universities and firms and how they work on this innovation piece. If it's okay, I'll just push on through the slides and then open up for Q&A and discussion at the end, rather than inviting questions partway through the slides. I hope that's okay.
Sure.
So just an example of skills. This is just, again, to try and give you some flavor of within all this data where universities can make a difference. And I will draw from the University of Birmingham because these are the examples I know and I'm involved in. We have a proposition that's growing quite rapidly called Birmingham Digital Futures. And within that, we have a set of programs around digital skills. Importantly, we've kicked off with what we call boot camps, which are very short, intensive programs as stepping stones into degree programs. And these, quite a lot of them are now focusing on digital skills. So some students who might want to become graduates or join our undergraduate program can do foundational programs. And amongst these, digital skills boot camps are a popular way of getting in. But we also do digital skills boot camps for non-graduates, including business people, executives, and what we call CPD, continuous professional development students. And these are growing quite rapidly. There's been estimates in the UK that the gap between the demand for digital skills, the potential for firms small and large to grow by moving into digital online services, the gap overall is about 50 billion per year. So one view of that is that is a potential loss. If we don't bridge the divide between the demand for digital skills and the supply, because there is a very large number, according to McKinsey, of underskilled or non-skilled people in our workforce when it comes to digital skills of all kinds, that could be a loss to the economy. We'll lose 50 billion of growth each year. We see it as an opportunity and we see it as a regional opportunity. So we're working with the region on pushing up digital skills, improving access, particularly for women and particularly for deprived communities, accelerating their access to digital skills so they can get jobs in companies that I'm going to mention in a minute. So this particular initiatives is with PwC, a very big local consulting firm, HSBC, which is next to one of our new buildings in the center of the city, and Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has just set up a very, very big office in the center of Birmingham, and it is looking for 3,000 coders, software skilled engineers. So the demand is absolutely massive, and we know that it has the potential to help grow the region, 52,000 new jobs in 4 years. But we're not just interested in this from a productivity or economic growth perspective. The university is interested in trying to increase the number of females gaining digital skills and gaining access to the workforce, particularly ethnic minority groups from the lower income communities in the city. So it's a growth agenda, and it's an inclusive growth agenda. I have just last week chaired the third we had 3 round tables with very senior executives from the firms, talking about their needs in digital skills and talking about the kinds of access to jobs in their firms, with educators and representatives from my university looking at how we can adapt our digital skills programs and boot camps to meet that need. And we have a shared agenda around skills, but we also have a shared agenda around inclusive growth as a city region. So it's an action-oriented partnership between the firms and universities. It's growing very quickly, and we're finding it tremendously encouraging, and it really is driving up our enthusiasm in terms of partnership for inclusive growth. So there's one example. I hope I didn't rattle through that too quickly and you understood, because what I'd like to do is move on to the innovation piece to finish up. So you will be familiar, I'm sure, with the very large debate on R&D commercialization. In the UK, we talk about what's called the Valley of Death, which is a lovely term, the Valley of Death. It's a term to describe the gap or the disconnect between universities and their research and development, pure blue sky R&D, and firms, and what firms need to enable them to produce better products and services. Now, the UK is actually quite well known for this gap compared to Germany or Japan or the Asian economies and the US. The UK has excellent universities and blue sky pure R&D, but it does not translate that R&D very effectively to help firms become more innovative. And that is a real priority for the current government. So that's just some data. I won't get into it, but it shows that the National Centre for Universities and Business, and if you're interested in looking, this might be an interesting organization for your university, given it's a commercially funded university. This is a National Centre for Universities and Business set up to try and improve the university business relationships and partnerships. One of the things it does is tracks cooperation agreements, and it tracks the kinds of outputs from universities that show the commercialization of R&D. So there's lots of data there from NCUB website, and it really has a lot of briefings and papers on how you help universities and firms work better together. Moving on to the university, though, the way we look at this is we have what we call a portfolio of what we call innovation assets. And this is very deliberate. It's part of the leadership's regional strategy and national strategy. And sorry if this is a bit confusing, but you can see that City Ready is actually one of those, because we focus on the translation and the commercialization of R&D, and we track it and try and assist it. Most of those other assets are very large facilities. They're invested facilities, where in fact the total of our invested capacity is in the region of 360, 370 million. And that's in physical assets, buildings and centers around the region that are focused on particular types of R&D. In the top, we have the Rail Infrastructure Centre that does rail digital rail and a range of rail-related R&D projects and training, and it's got a whole host of private sector investors, including the National Rail Track. Next to that, we've got the Manufacturing Technology Centre, which is defined as a catapult. It was actually partly government funded to accelerate the translation of university-based R&D into, in this case, advanced manufacturing processes in manufacturing businesses. And the MTC has become quite famous as one of the leading centres in the UK at translating advanced manufacturing R&D. The one below is the Energy Innovation Centre. I'm going to come on and just show you that on a separate slide. And then there's the Health Innovation Centre, which is also on a separate slide, because I'm going to dive into just two of these to give those as illustrations. But as I say, the total of that particular set is around 360 million investments. And they're co-investments with a small amount of government and university investments, but a very large portfolio of companies, large and small, who we've attracted to co-invest in these centres. The Manufacturing Technology Centre, the MTC, the largest investor is Rolls-Royce. And Rolls-Royce is attempting to build fan blades out of pure crystals so that it improves the sustainability of in-flight engines and reduces the maintenance costs. And if that technology breaks through, Rolls-Royce will overtake Boeing as the premier engine manufacturer. So it's very company-led R&D with clear business priorities in terms of the R&D breakthroughs that would create higher margins for the companies we work for. And I can come back to that list if it's of interest. I think it's probably better if I move on just to take a couple of deep dives before I finish with a list of sort of recommendations and lessons. So the Birmingham Health Innovation Campus, I'm sure I'm going quite fast here, but if I finish sooner, we'll be able to open up for discussion. I can work out which bits of this you're really interested in. Let me just give you these two case studies and then my final slide. The Birmingham Health Innovation Campus is one of our newer initiatives, and we talk in terms of life cycles. Manufacturing Technology Centre has been around for nearly 20 years. It's late in the life cycle. It's very established, and it's translating, and it's upskilling, and it's doing all the things we expect a place to do. The Birmingham Health Innovation Campus is much earlier. We have a 25-acre site between ourselves, the university, and one of the largest hospitals. If you see the thing at the top with the 3 turrets, that's one of the largest teaching hospitals in Europe. It's the army base for all evacuations from all military evacuations for the UK. And it's called the Queen Elizabeth, after our late Queen Hospital. And it's right next to our campus. So on a 25-acre site between us, the university, the other side of the canal there you can see, and the QE, we are setting up a health innovation campus. It is focused on digital customized medicine, which is around changing your prognosis according to the physiology of the patient, the cultural, the socioeconomic background, the gender, which is critical. Most medicines are developed for white males globally, and therefore the physiology of those medicines is not as good for particularly African females, interestingly, but they are not as good for different cultural and gender groups. Customized medicine will enable you to adapt medicines for very different types of people. So that's why it's called customized medicine. Life expectancy for women in Birmingham is 59 years. That's our average life expectancy. It's one of the most deprived cities. That compares to 69 years for some of the richer areas of Britain. So there's a 10-year gap in life expectancy between Birmingham and Surrey, which is near London. So the second reason for setting up this campus, the first is to do frontier research on customized medicine. The second reason is to serve the local population, to try and bridge the gap between healthcare in really wealthy parts of the UK and the Birmingham region, which is less well off. We have 66 sub-ethnic groups in the region. It's the most diverse population in Britain of any city, more than London. It's also the youngest population of any city in Europe in Birmingham. 41% of the population is under the age of 25. It's tremendously young, our population. So it's young, it's ethnically diverse. So the customized medicine that will be developed there through our precision medicine center and a number of other centers will focus also on inclusive healthcare for the region. So it's a great example again. And we have interest from, and we have investment, co-investment from a very wide range of firms, which I could list, but I think we'll move on to the next final example. So second last slide, coming to the end of my talk, I mentioned Tyseley. Tyseley is an energy park in the east side of Birmingham, quite away from our campus. It is on the location of a company and co-run with a company that's 300 years old. This company used to make wire, and it made the first transatlantic telephone cable on the planet to bridge the UK I don't know, 150 years ago, I think, between the UK and the USA. So it's an ancient company based there, and the 6th or 7th generation is a co-investor in an energy park with the University of Birmingham that's looking at net zero growth. So we have a recycling center, we have an energy storage center, we have a transport refueling center that does hydrogen trains and hydrogen fueled buses, and we have a heat decarbonization center. Sorry about the complexity here, but heat decarbonization is about reducing heat loss from households and from industry, because about 1/3 of our CO2 emissions in the UK is from heat loss. So if you reduce the carbon emissions through heat loss from buildings, you assist your CO2 net zero targets. And one of the corporate agendas here is to improve recycling, to push towards net zero fuels. But also the corporates, the companies were involved in here, including actually a couple of Chinese companies, as well as Siemens and Plessey and Airbus. They are very interested in helping us reduce heat loss in households. So that's a net zero innovation commercialization agenda at Tyseley. But I think what's important here is if you reduce the heat loss from a low income household, immediately in the east side of Birmingham, working with the communities there, you immediately reduce the dependency of those households on benefits, because all of the households in the low income deprived area of East Birmingham are reliant on government heat benefit. They actually get payment for their energy bills by the government because they cannot afford to pay for their heating. Energy bills have gone up by 17% in the UK in the last 6 months. So there is an even more bigger draw on public finances for low-income groups who cannot afford their energy bills. So if you put in place a heat decarbonisation program, and if you focus on low-income households, you immediately innovate, you commercialise technology, you prototype and you pilot new ways of helping households and innovation decarbonisation technologies. But at the same time, you help poor households reduce their dependence on government benefits, and you reduce public expenditure on subsidies. So you can see it's one of those programs of work that's in this sweet spot: productivity, net zero and sustainability, and inclusivity, the three outcomes of growth that City Ready is focused on, all encapsulated in this one program, which is one of our largest. It's about a 90 million program based in this one site on the east side of Birmingham. So it's kind of for us on a pedestal. And we've had some government officials, the Prime Minister, the head of Treasury, and a range of others, despite all the changes in our government. We've had a lot of very important visitors coming to visit that site because it's seen as one of the exemplars of economic growth, connecting universities and firms in the whole country. So I'm throwing an awful lot at you, and I realize that was quite a dense presentation, but let me just bring it to a close with the final slide and then open it up for discussion now, given the timing. You asked me, I think, and it's interesting to reflect on what this tells us about building better partnerships between universities and firms. And I've been involved in this as a dean of a business school. I've been involved as a researcher, given my own research areas, and I've been involved now as a leader at the university level, trying to help all parts of the university connect with business to do things that I've talked about. First and foremost, this is about relationships. It sounds very easy to say, but actually relationships where you can explore shared goals and values and interests and incentives, these are critical. Never underestimate, and if you've tried this in business schools or elsewhere, never underestimate, there is a very different language and a very different culture in universities compared to business. I'd love to hear more about your own university, because it sounds like one of these hybrid universities where you have really got at the center of what you do a partnership with business. And I'd love to hear how that works. In most universities, academics are often not capable or not incentivized or interested in engaging with firms. So you have to overcome that barrier. So finding those shared goals and incentivizing joint work is important. Communicating, translating between our cultures. I understand, but a lot of academics don't understand about profit and loss, about margins, about EBITDA, about market share. I understand the language of business, and therefore I can translate our university opportunities into that language and bring that language to my academics, but a lot of people can't. So you have to take time to find what I call the sweet spot of mutual interest, where you're going to focus quickly on a project that the firm wants and will invest in, and the university wants as well. So long-term relationships are key. This is often reliant on champions. You've got to find your champions. They will lead the big programs. All of those centers I've talked about, and they're big centers, rely on quite a small number of people. That is vulnerable. If they leave or they lose interest, the program can collapse. If you don't have champions, they won't work at all. So find the champion from the firm, find the champion from your faculty to join together to lead. Universities, I've mentioned this, universities are often actually weak at knowing what firms need, but I think they're also weak at what we call entry points, signposting. Firms often complain that they find it very difficult to get into a university. Particularly small firms find this tough. They find it very difficult to find the person they can talk to explore areas of potential collaboration. And they also find it very difficult to understand what is the value of a university to them and how they can explore that. But I think at the end of the day, my final point is that I think firms, because of this barrier, this communication barrier, firms underestimate sometimes the added value of universities. And sometimes we get approached as pure subcontractors. They want to contract us, and sometimes that's appropriate, but actually partnerships where there's a mutual understanding and an end goal that's shared by both is much more, I think, reliable than a subcontracting relationship where you're paid a certain amount of money to achieve some deliverables. So I think at the end of the day, striving from relationships has been part of the success of a lot of the programs I've been involved in. Let me stop there because I've thrown an awful lot at you, and I apologize for a dense presentation, but I did want to pack in some key points, and I hope that was both of interest and understandable. That I'm happy to open up to some Q&A, some clarification. I'd love to hear about some of your own experiences in your university, and to open up a discussion. So if it's appropriate, I'll stop sharing my slides now.
Thank you very much, dear professor. So we are very happy to hear these good examples. Actually, our university was established by Istanbul Chamber of Commerce, and we also have a partnership in Technopark Istanbul, and we provide some trainings and, of course, mentorships to different companies. So we would like to make contribution to the innovation in our city as well. Excellent. And also, I would like to learn more about your suggestions to developing countries. How could they make more contributions to the innovation in their environment, basically?
Just if that's the first question, just to clarify, do you mean your contribution jointly with us or in a different sense? Sorry to.
No, from the university's point of view, how could they make contributions for the development of their regions, their cities, their countries. You just tell us some important points, but what might be the additional things that could be done?
Yeah, well, I think the first area I'd highlight is that universities need to be conscious and strategically conscious of where they make the biggest impact and where they don't, which is why my institute measures these things. If you don't measure and you don't understand what your impact is in economic terms, and that's why some of the earlier slides tried to show some of the indicators, it's very difficult as a university to either target improvements in its performance and measure its performance, but it's also difficult to understand precisely which partnerships help you contribute, if you see what I mean. So we have become much more strategic at that, and the universities in the UK are being asked by the government to be more strategic. So I don't know if you're familiar with our infrastructure, but we have what's called the REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework. Universities across the UK are measured for their research excellence, but they've added now the KEF. So increasingly, the money you get from government as a university is dependent on your knowledge exchange framework and showing through the measures and the indicators I showed earlier that you actually add value and you make a contribution economically. So my first point is understand, first of all, how much of a contribution you currently make. What is the value of your joint partnerships with businesses in terms of skills, your contribution in training and skills and education, but also any joint research? And then strategically focus on where you can improve or invest jointly in improving that output and that outcome as a contribution. Do you understand that? I mean, because in some ways that strategic targeting to me is key, because a lot of universities do this quite unconsciously. They just do stuff and it looks like good stuff, but it's not very strategic and it's not very targeted.
So we should have long-term plans, basically, strategic plans, or we should include our innovation activities to our strategic plan as well, right? Yeah,
I think so. And work out where your key areas of contribution should be. If it's to do with your city, if they're your partners and the chamber, then my assumption is that you would be rewarded by focusing more on local firms and supporting local businesses. But it would be interesting to find out which of those local businesses created the most employment and the most supplier multiplier effects in the region. Because if you focused your partnerships on those firms, you could evidence that your economic impact was improving as a result. That's about strategic targeting and selecting of the firms that are the most important for the region. Most universities wouldn't do that, but my institute helps our university do that.
Actually, our university has a commission which organizes our strategic plan, and I'm the head of that commission. And of course, for the upcoming period, we will focus more about our contributions in terms of innovation to our city, to our region. Thank you very much for reminding that to us. And always, would you like to ask a question, please?
Yes, Professor, thank you. First of all, Professor, thank you for this very beneficial webinar. Actually, I have a question that how can innovation be fostered by strengthening the links between research and business practice? Could you give any examples, sir?
No, that's a really good question. Thank you. I mean, first and foremost, business schools are good at this because business schools study and teach business. It's as simple as that. So in a sense, if you have a group who specialize in operations management or marketing, they immediately work with client companies for their research and their teaching. And the business school has about 300 corporate partnerships, formal and informal. My business school, it's a large business school. So one of the dilemmas is that sometimes business schools they work slightly disconnected from the rest of the university. So the best partnerships is where business schools plus your engineering department in a university work together. And one example of that is Rolls-Royce. We have a very big partnership with Rolls-Royce. Our scientists and engineers help Rolls-Royce improve their engines and their engineering. But I've got a team in the business school of operations management, supply chain experts who do very large training programs and help the global supply chain processes improve at Rolls-Royce. And then those case studies are put back into our MBA program to teach students. So once you've established a relationship with a firm, if that relationship is connecting different types of disciplines and different learning across the university, that builds, and the critical mass of business we're doing Rolls-Royce has grown. So that's one example, I think.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Selma, would you like to ask a question?
Please. First of all, thank you, sir, for this valuable discussion and meeting. And I'd like to thank Istanbul Ticaret University for providing us with this precious opportunity to benefit from your informations. My questions is, what are the areas in which university-firm partnership emerge?
Oh, what are the areas? Do you mean academic disciplines, or do you mean company sectors, or?
Both of them.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So in terms of money, in terms of funding, there's no question that the most significant is engineering and medicine. So if you look at the R&D income for most universities, particularly large science-based universities like ours, the medical school and the engineering school are by far the biggest in terms of income. And then we break that down for our university, cancer. So cancer research and liver research and child health. These are all big areas for R&D funding. And you can find all this, by the way. The national government has some very interesting data maps of which universities get funded the most for what kinds of disciplines and where the money goes. It's a really usable database. And then in engineering, it's rail, it's materials, it's energy, and we have a very large quantum sensors group. So your specialist areas as disciplines are the ones that tend to attract in those areas the most money. I'll come on to the firms in a second, but if you look at non-funded interaction and partnerships, then it's business schools. Business schools don't attract a lot of funding compared to, we have millions and millions that goes into engineering and medicine. The business school gets good funding from business, but it because it's not spent on big buildings and laboratories and R&D equipment and, colliders and great kit. There's no capital investment. Business schools have a much, much larger volume of relationships with business and a much wider variety of business, from service businesses to manufacturing to creative and the arts. But it's not as much money. And then if we break it down into areas for again, going back to medicine, it's pharmaceuticals companies. We don't tend to work on discovery. We tend to work on manufacturing and delivery and customized medicine. But if you look at engineering, it's rail companies, manufacturing companies, materials, Rolls-Royce, rail companies, that kind of thing. And I can give more details. Siemens is a core partner in our energy work. And then in the business school, it's a much wider variety. We have partnerships with the consulting firms, KPMG. We have partnerships on process management with manufacturers. And we have big partnerships on digital skills and innovation and strategy with business financial services companies and consulting firms and insurance firms. And they're involved in both R&D and contract work, but also in teaching. They co-teach with us and they work with students on student projects. So, yeah. And I think universities in the UK vary in terms of what they would tell you about their specialisms, but there's pretty much a standard pattern in terms of where most of the money is and the partnerships and where most of the interaction is, and that's business schools. Does that make sense? It's a big question, a really good question, and I could say more, but I hope that made sense.
Thank you. We also received a question from YouTube, and they ask, how do universities contribute to create green and entrepreneurship intentions among their students?
Yeah, again, a very, very good question. I've been involved in this. So I didn't show you a picture. I won't go back to it. We have a very old established campus, which is about 3 miles out of the city centre, and it's a really nice ancient university campus But we built a building, which I was very closely involved in the center of the city, both to get closer to businesses and to other communities in the city. It's called The Exchange, and it cost us a lot of money. But I chaired the delivery board, and the delivery board for the university was invested in trying to set up an incubator, a startup entrepreneurship center. So we have a big incubator on campus, which focuses on biotech and science and medicine. Our new incubator in the center of the city is focused on a range of different projects, but particularly digital creative industries and some software and online services businesses. So one of the routes in which you interact and engage and develop entrepreneurship is by establishing a physical incubator. Two of my team are specialists in understanding the impact of science parks and spin-outs and startups and the university involvement in those. That's a big area of research, and we've done a bit of work on that. We also work with the city and the Chamber of Commerce on entrepreneurship and business growth. The second way is quite powerful, is through students. So we have, as I say, nearly 7,000 students. So the university has 37,000 students. About 7,000 of those are in the business school. It's a big business school. We have 280 faculty and staff. So it's a big business school I used to run. And we have an entrepreneurship research group, and we have a lot of students who are interested in business entrepreneurship and setting up businesses. So we have business school projects. We have spin-out startup exercises. We have secondments. We have internships. And we fund, through the university and the business school, we fund students to start businesses or work with companies on entrepreneurship projects. That is a very powerful way if you can build up the critical mass. And I'm sure you're involved in that area of work. And the Chamber of Commerce always helps us, particularly with smaller firms, rather than larger firms. Small firms that are desperate for somebody to come in and do simple things like help me with my accounting system so I can understand if I'm making any profit, or help me with my tax, or help me break into a new market, or help me set up a new business to do this. The students are really good at that, and they work with faculty on projects that do that. That's a very powerful route.
Actually, we have technology transfer office in our university as well, and we have a small incubation center, and we would like to also trigger the entrepreneurial drives of our students as well, and I teach entrepreneurship courses. So it's very nice to hear these things from you as a model.
Excellent.
So, yeah. Leyla Hanım, would you like to ask a question? These are our PhD students, I told you in the beginning, as you know, and they're interested especially to your speech. Yeah, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Hello. Thank you very much for your nice presentation and discussion. What would be your general suggestions for today's firm leaders in terms of establishing strong cooperations with the universities to support regional innovation?
Yeah, no, good question. I think, first of all, again, I come back to relationships. I think relationships are important. I encourage business leaders to think in terms of what I call holistic relationships. So if you can set up a partnership with if a big firm can set up a partnership with the university, it should encompass not just one thing, but lots of things. And it should be led by the leadership of the university. And it should be led by a relationship between the leaders. Once you establish that, you can do many things with that relationship. You can do joint projects, R&D projects. So again, Rolls-Royce and Siemens and some other big firms are our partner companies that we do a lot of things with. But you can invest in joint research and development and innovation. But secondly, you can recruit from that university. So you can co-teach students, you can get involved in student education, and you can recruit your intake from the university. Thirdly, you can also work on civic or citizenship or charity work as a university partner helping the community. So those three sort of areas of cooperation stem from the top-down relationship. I think it's more difficult big firms, I think that's possible. And big firms are powerful enough to get large universities to adapt what they do to align and fit better with what the firm wants. Do you understand? So Siemens is bringing quite a lot of money to bear in co-developing ecological energy, low energy technologies, and a net zero campus, as well as innovation programs. Because they're bringing so much funding and partnership, the university has changed some of its strategy to work with Siemens, starting with a top-down relationship. So if the company's big enough, that's feasible, and the leaders can start with the relationship. Small firms, it's more difficult. And small local firms often complain that they find it difficult because big universities just carry on teaching the same stuff. They research the same stuff, and small firms don't find a point where they can work with us. So small firms, it's tougher. And I've often suggested they use chambers of commerce and come together as a group of small firms working through a chamber of commerce to list particular needs they have collectively. Because a university will change its plans, and it will set up programs, and it will set up research if a large group of small firms together collectively working with a chamber of commerce in a region asks for something from them, if that makes sense. So again, the relationship might not be with the leaders of those individual small firms. The relationship might be with the chief executive of the Chamber of Commerce, representing either a sector of firms or a set of small firms who would like, you know, procurement access, or they'd like some work support on basic skills or work on foreign market entry. And the university then will be willing, I think, to change and adapt and help those firms. Trying to work with lots of small firms is quite difficult for big universities. So relationships, different pathways for different types of firms. And then I guess finally, if leaders can find out what universities are good at, again, I've listed some of the areas my university specializes in. It will be much easier for those business leaders to find the right university for the right partnership. Otherwise, they're going to go to a university that has no interest in advanced manufacturing and ask about advanced manufacturing, and they won't develop that relationship. So alignment, matchmaking, finding the right partnerships is always important for leaders of businesses as well as leaders of universities.
Actually, in our university, we also, participate in different projects, which we get some incentives. So we try to conduct joint projects with different partners as well. But of course, we have to increase the number of these projects and these partnerships as well. So thank you very much. Mary, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you. Hi, Professor. My question is that do you think undergraduate and graduate education in the field of innovation will change in the near future?
Yes, so slightly embarrassing, I don't teach anymore. So I used to teach a lot, and I used to teach innovation. In fact, I set up at Warwick, when I was at Warwick University, I set up one of the largest online programs for, on the one hand, international business, and then a separate program on innovation, particularly around global innovation. So I'd like to get back to teaching one day, but I'm too busy at the moment. And I miss it. I miss dealing with students, and it keeps me a bit younger when you deal with undergraduates because they're very young and I'm very old. But so I don't teach, but I think the university and the business school does have very large programs actually on my area, which is primarily international business. But we also teach innovation, and the innovation program comes out of the management department in the business school. And one of the things we failed at, which I think is important and is successful in other places, we have failed to co-teach, to jointly teach innovation with the business school and engineering together. And one of the problems with our size is that we are so big, there are territories, there are boundaries between colleges. And the engineering college does its teaching very differently. And the business school has tried to join up to teach innovation with engineering, and it's not worked. If you look at Warwick Manufacturing Group at Warwick University, or you look at the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge University, and some other examples, you have engineering faculty and business school faculty doing a much better job of teaching innovation to students. What they also do in those places, and we do a bit of this, is they bring in external engineers, chief executives from very innovative companies, and they use them and work with them to really bring the lessons alive. I'm sure you're very good at that because you're so close to the Chamber of Commerce. You probably have a lot of business people helping you with that. But in some universities like ours, you have to constantly push to get business people in to teach the students and to talk to the students to, you know, not just give them theoretical frameworks, but to understand, help them understand what the real world of business is about. Business schools are very good at that. So the students go on secondments, and there are some really good ones. We had a student group, recently a team of MBAs going to Formula One company to put together a business plan to develop a new Formula One car. And it was wonderful because the students were very clever, but this project working with a big Formula One company in our region was, they just loved it. They got engaged, they learned more, and the undergraduates joined in with the MBAs and they learned from the MBA students who are much more mature. So one day I still write and I'm publishing my textbook, but one day I'll go back to actually teaching some of this stuff. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Okay. Do you think international companies make enough contribution for regional development in terms of innovation?
Well, a huge contribution. Yeah. So more than half, I believe, I'd have to check my numbers. In the UK, more than half of R&D investment comes from companies that are not British companies. Okay, that's an important statistic. So more than half of the research and development done in the UK is funded by foreign firms in the UK. And if you look at the top 20 list of the biggest R&D spenders on the planet, the Americans dominate, you know, Microsoft, Google, so on and so forth, Alphabet. But actually Chinese firms and Asian firms more generally are moving up that hierarchy. So Huawei and Tencent, as well as the manufacturing firms in China, particularly the car companies, they are increasingly investing more and more. So the largest R&D centers are not in the UK. The largest are globally in the US and in parts of Asia and some parts of Europe. But Europe as a whole is losing out. The Chinese, I spent about 7 or 8 years studying China and trying to understand how China was moving up value chains to invest in high value R&D. And I was a visiting professor at Zhejiang in Hangzhou, south of Shanghai, and loved that time. But the Chinese will be, in my view, the preeminent civilization in terms of R&D investment. They will overtake the US eventually, and the US is bigger than Europe as a whole. So yes, global firms have a lot, are hugely important. I think it's important for countries like ours, and I would include Turkey and the UK together in this. I think it's important for companies like ours to understand what are our distinctive strengths and understand where we position ourselves, both as a country, but also, you know, firms and universities. Where do we position ourselves in what I call global value chains of innovation? Where do we situate? I mean, Israel is tremendously strategic in positioning itself as a country in a kind of hierarchy of sectors. And it focuses on security software and online services, but also pharmaceuticals. And it's explicitly, like Singapore and other countries, invested in an R&D strategy because it's a small country to make sure that it's got distinctive advantage in particular areas. Now, the UK has a broader set of advantages, but the UK is getting weaker in terms of its commercialization and its R&D compared to international comparators. So any country, Turkey and the UK included, need to be very strategic about not trying to do everything. You know, what are our distinctive assets? Is it cheap labor? Is it a lot of engineering skills in a particular area? Is it having a lot of firms in a particular area? And how does that give you an opportunity to focus investment with companies to become a specialized cluster? In Istanbul, for example, focusing on a particular industry sector where you can add value in global value chains with other firms, but you have the power to attract some of those firms to invest in your country, your region, your city. And that's a difficult question, but it's something I've worked with some governments on, and I think is an important question for governments, universities, and firms to come together and discuss and come up with a focal point for them to jointly invest in. I think that's really important. So it's a good question. Long answer.
Thank you. What might be the emerging research areas in the international business and also innovation, maybe? What
Yes.
can you suggest us?
Yeah, but I mean, one of the problems is that you see both regions and city regions in particular that I've worked with, but also countries basically saying that they're very, very good at everything. And that's just not, it's just not true. So everybody says we're good at creative industries, medicines, healthcare, digital, professional online services, gaming. So there's a checklist, and every mayor in the world says, well, my region's really good at this, and they're not. They don't have an advantage because they have not, either because it's just marketing and PR, but more often they've never done the analysis you need to understand your relative distinctive advantages compared to other city regions. And every city region has advantages, but they haven't actually explored and discovered and found them. So, you know, I've helped our mayor and I've helped national government increasingly on, let's just not try and be really good at that because we're not. Let's focus on this because we either are good or are likely to be good in about 5 or 6 years. That's our strength. That's where we have what we call latent advantages, hidden advantages. And in the UK, it's very clear. I mean, creative industries, media combined with online services, but also professional, financial and insurance services, we're really good at. We are good at advanced manufacturing, but it will be a smaller and smaller employer. And it doesn't, you know, a lot of it's not the big R&D spender. Pharmaceuticals is big R&D spender, creative media is big R&D, but obviously computing, online software, the Google, Alphabet, these are the big investors. So you've got to connect where the money's going with your own distinctive advantages, both in terms of skills, assets, the firms and the universities that you've got in the region. Going back to my first framework, if you don't do that, you're thinking in the dark, and strategically you won't be helping your government focus their investment.
How about professors like us, for example? What might be the important topics for making your research for our papers, you know, or books?
So do you mean academically? Yeah. Well, I think there's a very live debate around clusters again. I mean, clusters, innovation clusters, and how you generate what academics call agglomeration economies. This has been talked about for 25, 30 years. In fact, one of my first papers in 1993, that shows how old I was, one of my first postdoc papers was on how you generate a cluster from spin-outs from universities. And I compared Edinburgh, the Scottish region, to other places. What's new about that debate is the economic geography. So what we're doing and what I think is exciting is around trying to understand the specific regional impact and the regional distinction apart from the country. So most of the research has been done on a national level. How does the US compare, you know, with China or Japan? How do national systems of innovation evolve, and how do governments invest in national innovation strategies? What we're doing is taking that to the city region level, which is why that's the title of my institute. And academically, there is a lack of understanding about how city regions capture and generate more innovation from the combination of factors they've got, and how you focus on the things that add most to your city region. Because if you think about a spin out or a startup or a new technology, in our terminology academically, it can be appropriated. A firm can come in and buy a small firm. A Chinese company can come and buy IP. It can buy patents. It can buy technology. They can even hire skilled people and move them over. In fact, that's what happened to our car industry. Hundreds of engineers went from the West Midlands to Shanghai over a period of months to transfer technology. So you've got to work out what is fixed in your region and what helps your region, what can't be bought. That moves you a bit away from IP and technology and a bit more into this systemic knowledge exchange. And there's a lot of academic research that needs to work on that because it's a gap in the research.
Thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to catch you to talk about international business, but you also opened a different path to us. Maybe next time we will be talking about international business more. So thank you very much for joining our webinar. It was our honor to host you basically. And if you want to come to Turkey, please feel free to contact with us. And Elçin Hoca will make the closing speech. Thank you very much.
I will do that. No, but thank you very much for hosting me and fantastic questions and showing an interest in my work. I really appreciate it. And it's very nice to meet everybody. So one day I'll come back to Istanbul and it would be lovely to visit you.
Sure. Elçin Hocam, buyurun.
Thank you very much for this for those valuable informations. Actually, I wanted to ask one question, but you already gave the answer, because I think that if what you think about small firms, how we can attract their attention, but you already talked about it also. Thank you very much. Professor Karabulut didn't tell you, but she was smiling while we were talking about entrepreneurship, because she's our Turkish Journal of Entrepreneurship's journal editor. It's a young journal.
Very good.
And we would like to see you in our board as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful. Just what we need.
Okay.
Excellent. Good.
We also have application and research centers. Already we have one important research center about university and business relations. And this research center tried to make collaborations between, try to make a bridge between Chamber of Commerce and our university. And, you know, engineering faculties generally easily make contribution to the industries.
Yeah.
Our Faculty of Engineering is also have collaborations with industries, especially defense industry. But for the business world, our Faculty of Business, this research center helps us to make a deep relation between our Chamber of Commerce.
Excellent.
So thank you very much for this valuable webinar. We are so excited with being.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was an enjoyable experience and really nice to meet you all. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Teşekkür Elçin Hocam. Thank you to all our students, participants. We would like to see you in the next webinar. Bye bye. Take care.
Okay.